The wind howled through the narrow stone corridors of Winforth Keep, carrying the scent of wet earth and betrayal. Ilara stood hidden behind the tapestry in her father's study, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the cold wall. Through the woven fabric she heard his voice, steady, proud and cruel. "She is barren," Lord Garren said, his tone devoid of hesitation. "No man will have her. The Alpha King needs peace and I need gold. He may take her for whichever purpose suits him." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The ink bottle on the desk rattled under his hand. She had known her father to be harsh, but never heartless. Her heart pounded so violently that she feared it would betray her hiding place. The visiting envoy, a messenger of King Alaric Thorn, replied coolly, "His Majesty accepts. The king will receive her before the month's end. The debt of your pack will be forgiven." A seal struck parchment, a life exchanged for coin. When they were gone, Ilara emerged, her eyes burning but dry. Her reflection in the window pane seemed like a ghost. Pale skin, silver-threaded gown, eyes once full of hope, now dulled by humiliation. So this was to be her fate. Sold like livestock because her womb had not yet blessed her pack with heirs. That night, while the servants whispered and the hearth dimmed, she packed her few belongings, her mother's rosary, a small wooden comb, and a letter she had written years ago but never sent, a letter to no one, a prayer to be seen as more than what her body could or could not give. Outside, the night air stung with frost. A stable boy, barely older than 12, handed her the reins of a grey mare. "My lady," he murmured, pity flickering in his eyes. She forced a smile. "No tears, little one. I am not dead." The moon shone through the mist as she rode through the gates of Winforth for the last time. The sound of the iron portcullis closing behind her felt like the end of a chapter she had never agreed to begin. If you want to see how Ilara's fate turns from despair to destiny, make sure to subscribe now. This story will break your heart and heal it again. The road to Thorn Keep wound through frozen fields and dark woods. Crows followed her for miles, their cries echoing like curses. The world seemed stripped of mercy, and yet deep inside her, a quiet ember refused to die. For days she travelled with the king's escort, men who spoke little and looked at her with guarded curiosity. They camped beneath pine canopies, the scent of smoke mingling with snow. Around the fires, she caught fragments of rumour that the Alpha King had buried his wife 3 winters ago, that no woman could melt his heart, that he ruled through fear and unbroken will. What kind of man marries a woman sold to him? She wondered aloud one evening, tracing a scar on her palm. One of the soldiers, a grizzled veteran named Bram, answered quietly, "A man who's seen too much war, my lady, and learned to buy peace with blood." Ilara stared into the flames. "Then perhaps I'll bring him none." The journey ended as dawn broke over Thorn Valley. From the ridge, she saw the fortress rising from mist and mountain, massive, grey, crowned with banners of black and gold. The roar of the northern wind made it seem alive, breathing, waiting. Fear crept through her veins, yet beneath it pulsed something stronger, defiance. She had been sold, yes, but her soul remained her own. When the drawbridge lowered and the soldiers led her horse inside, Ilara straightened her spine. The courtyard fell silent. Eyes turned toward her, the barren bride, the unwanted offering. But she did not bow. She dismounted with steady grace, her voice calm as she addressed the guard at the gate. "Tell your king," she said, "that the woman he bought will not kneel for shame." And in that moment, though she did not yet know it, the course of her destiny began to shift. The gates of Thorn Keep rose before Ilara like the jaws of a beast, tall, black, and edged with iron. The sound of hooves striking stone echoed through the courtyard as the escort halted. Frost clung to every surface, glimmering beneath the faint morning light. The air carried the scent of smoke and cold metal, the unmistakable weight of a kingdom forged by war. Ilara dismounted without assistance, her boots sinking slightly into the thin layer of snow. She drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders, not only to shield herself from the biting wind, but from the eyes fixed upon her. Guards lined the ramparts, their armor dull with use, their faces impassive. The soldiers did not whisper, but their silence spoke loudly enough. A man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, with a trimmed beard and a scar running across his jaw. His armor bore the sigil of a black wolf. "Lady Alara Winforth?" he asked, voice even but curious. "I am she," Alara answered, meeting his gaze. "I am Sir Cedric Hale, captain of the Royal Guard. His Majesty awaits you in the Great Hall." She nodded, though her heart fluttered. As she followed him through the massive doors, the sound of their footsteps merged with the distant tolling of a bell. The corridors were vast and cold, their walls adorned with banners depicting victories of old, kings crowned after bloodshed, battles won beneath crimson skies. Everywhere she looked, she felt the weight of legacy. And somewhere within these walls waited the man to whom she now belonged. The great hall opened before her like a cathedral of stone. Fire roared within a grand hearth, its light flickering across long tables and carved pillars. The scent of roasted meat mingled with the faint musk of burning pine. At the far end, upon a dais, sat King Alaric Thorn. He was not what she had imagined. The stories spoke of a beast, a conqueror with a heart of ice. But the man before her, though stern and powerful, held a stillness that spoke of restraint rather than savagery. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, streaked with the faintest touch of gold where the firelight caught it. His eyes, grey as winter steel, studied her without a word. Alara curtsied, lowering her gaze, though pride made her movements deliberate and graceful. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "Rise," his voice commanded, deep, steady, carrying authority without need for volume. She obeyed. There was a pause, as if he weighed her not by beauty or worth, but by the silence between her words. "So," he said finally, "the daughter of Winforth stands before me. You were not told why you are here?" "I was told enough," she replied, her tone even. "I was sold for your peace and my father's coin, nothing more." A murmur swept through the guards stationed at the sides. Alaric's gaze sharpened, but there was no anger, only curiosity. "You speak plainly for one who has lost everything." "Perhaps," Alara said, her chin lifting slightly, "because there is nothing left to fear." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, passed through his expression. Then he leaned back in his chair, the faintest smirk touching his lips. "You'll find fear has many faces in this court. Learn to recognize them before they recognize you." Alara did not respond. The fire cracked between them, casting shifting shadows that danced like ghosts upon the walls. She sensed that every word spoken here carried consequence, every silence a hidden test. At last Alaric turned to Sir Cedric. "See that Lady Alara is given chambers in the eastern wing. She will dine with us this evening." "Yes, Your Majesty," Cedric replied. As they exited the hall, Alara glanced back once. The king had not moved, but she felt his eyes still upon her, like the touch of frost against bare skin, cold, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Outside, the corridors hummed faintly with the murmur of servants and the clatter of armor. Cedric led her through arched passageways lined with narrow windows. Through them, she saw the vast valley below, blanketed in snow and silence. "This place," she whispered half to herself, "feels alive and watching." Cedric glanced sideways. "Aye," he said. "Thorn Keep remembers everything that happens within its walls." When he left her at her chamber door, Alara paused before entering. Her reflection in the polished metal of the door handle looked foreign, haunted yet unbroken. She stepped inside, exhaling slowly. The chamber was cold, but the hearth had been lit. She placed her belongings upon the table and touched the wooden comb her mother had once held. Tomorrow she would face the court. Tonight she would survive the silence. And somewhere beyond the walls, the king of Thorn Keep thought of the woman who had not knelt for shame. The great hall shimmered with candlelight that evening, every flame reflected in polished goblets and silver plates. Alara entered quietly, guided by a young maid whose eyes darted nervously between the guests. The long tables were already filled with nobles, knights, and courtiers dressed in deep hues of crimson and gold. Laughter drifted through the air, brittle and forced like glass about to crack. Alara's pulse quickened. She had faced her father's cruelty and the journey through snow, yet this court of wolves dressed in velvet, felt far more perilous. At the head of the table, King Alaric Thorne sat in silence, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, the other holding a goblet of wine. When he looked up and their eyes met, something flickered between them, neither welcome nor rejection, but awareness. Sir Cedric stepped beside her. "You'll sit to the king's left," he murmured. "It is an honour few are given." "Or a test few survive," Elara whispered back. He hid a faint smile. "That too." She took her seat, conscious of every glance cast her way. Across from her sat a woman whose beauty was sharp and deliberate, Lady Serene Valemont. Her gown shimmered like molten silver, her lips curved in an elegant smile that failed to reach her eyes. "So," Serene began, her tone smooth as silk, "the king's new guest joins us at last. We have all been terribly eager to meet the woman who could capture His Majesty's diplomacy." A few chuckles rippled along the table. Elara kept her gaze on the roasted pheasant before her. "I am no diplomat, my lady," she said evenly, "only a woman with little left to lose." Alaric's hand stilled for a moment before he resumed eating. Serene's smile thinned. "How tragic," she replied, "though I suppose some women are born to inspire pity rather than passion." Elara lifted her goblet. "And some are born to hide fear behind fine words." The table fell silent. Only the fire crackled. Alaric's eyes moved between them, unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, a low chuckle escaped him. "Lady Serene," he said mildly, "I believe Lady Elara has earned her place at this table. Let us allow her to eat in peace." Serene inclined her head, though her jaw tightened. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Dinner continued under the hum of restrained conversation. Elara ate little, her stomach heavy with unease. The nobles spoke of trade, war, and winter harvests, matters that felt distant from her own quiet humiliation. Yet through the shallow talk, she sensed the undercurrent of fear that ruled this hall. Every smile was calculated, every compliment a weapon. When the musicians began to play, servants poured more wine. The scent of spiced venison and smoke mingled in the air. Elara glanced toward the king again. He sat upright, shoulders broad beneath his dark tunic, expression carved in control. But now and then she caught him studying her, not with desire, but with measured curiosity, as if she were a puzzle that refused to yield its truth. A nobleman beside her leaned in, voice low. "You should not have crossed Lady Serene. She is close to His Majesty." "I noticed," Elara replied quietly. He smirked. "You are brave. Or foolish." "Both have served me equally," she said. Moments later, Alaric rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Enough talk of debts and trade. Tonight we dine not as lords and courtiers, but as survivors of another winter. Raise your cups." All obeyed. Elara followed, the golden wine trembling slightly in her hand. "To survival," Alaric declared, "and to those who do not yield, even when the world tells them to." His gaze met hers again. The hall cheered, but Elara heard only the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. When the meal ended, she rose to leave, her legs unsteady but her head high. Serene's voice followed her like a shadow. "Careful, Lady Winforth," she said softly. "The king enjoys challenges, but he never keeps them." Elara paused at the door, turning slightly. "Then I will not aim to be kept," she answered, "only to be remembered." The hall fell silent once more as she walked away, the echo of her footsteps the only sound that dared linger behind. The morning after the feast dawned grey and heavy with mist. Elara awoke to the faint toll of a distant bell and the hollow ache of unease. She had not slept much. The laughter and whispers of the great hall still echoed in her mind. When the maid arrived with a basin of cold water, Elara dismissed her gently and dressed herself in a simple wool gown. She wanted no finery today, only clarity. A knock sounded at her chamber door. Sir Cedric entered, expression solemn. "His Majesty requests your presence," he said. Elara steadied her breath. "Now?" "He waits in the council chamber," Cedric replied. "He has dismissed the others." Her heart tightened. To be summoned alone by the Alpha King could mean anything, judgment, interrogation, or worse, yet she refused to show fear. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin. "Lead the way." The chamber they entered was vast but eerily silent. Heavy tapestries muffled the sound of their steps, and tall windows let in pale light that turned the dust into drifting silver. At the center stood Alaric Thorne, arms folded behind his back, his gaze fixed upon the valley below. "Leave us," he told Cedric without turning. The captain bowed once and withdrew. The door closed, and the silence that followed pressed against Ilara's skin like frost. "You speak boldly," Alaric said at last. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "Few would dare answer Lady Serene as you did." Ilara clasped her hands before her. "She insulted me before your court. I chose not to play the part of the meek." His eyes met hers. "You are in my hall, surrounded by my people. Defiance is not a virtue here." "Nor is cruelty," she replied quietly. "If you wish to break me, your majesty, my father has already done so." A shadow crossed his features, brief but visible. He stepped closer, studying her face as though searching for something hidden. "They say you are Barren." Ilara's breath caught, but she did not look away. "They say many things. That does not make them true." He circled her slowly, the faint sound of his boots against stone marking the rhythm of his words. "You were sold to me as part of a debt, a woman without value in her father's house. Tell me, Lady Ilara, why should you hold any in mine?" Her voice trembled at first but found steadiness with each word. "Because I am more than a womb to trade. Because peace bought with humiliation will never last. And because if you wish to rule with justice, your majesty, you must know the worth of those the world calls worthless." The king's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with thought. The fire crackled behind him, throwing lines of gold across the stone floor. "You speak like someone who's known loss," he said finally. "I have known silence," she answered, "the kind that follows when no one believes you have the right to speak." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind outside moaned through the high windows, carrying with it the chill of the northern peaks. Then Alaric turned away, resting his hands on the back of a carved chair. "You will not be sent away," he said quietly. "But understand this here, every word weighs something. Choose them as if your life depends on them, because it might." Ilara inclined her head. "Then I will make them count." When he faced her again, his expression had softened, though only slightly. "You may go," he said. "The council meets tomorrow. You will attend." She curtsied and turned to leave. At the door, his voice stopped her once more. "Lady Ilara," he said, his tone unreadable, "when you stood before me in the hall, I expected fear. Instead, I found defiance. Do not let it destroy you." She met his gaze over her shoulder. "Or you may find, your majesty, that it saves me instead." The faintest glimmer of amusement touched his mouth before he dismissed her with a nod. As Ilara walked back through the dim corridors, her steps steady and her heart storming, she realized that what frightened her most was not the king's power, but the possibility that he was not the monster she had been told to fear. The dawn broke cold and pale over the valley, painting the snow in shades of silver. From her chamber window, Ilara saw movement in the courtyard below. Soldiers mounting horses, servants carrying spears, hounds barking impatiently. The hunt. When the knock came at her door, she already knew. Sir Cedric stood there, cloaked in fur, his expression unreadable. "His Majesty requests your presence at the hunt," he said. "The hunt?" she asked. "I have no skill with bow or blade." He hesitated. "Then today will teach you something of both." Ilara wrapped herself in her thickest cloak and followed him down the spiral stairs. The cold struck her cheeks like glass. The king stood beside his black stallion, his breath a pale mist in the frigid air. Around him nobles tightened saddles and adjusted gauntlets, their laughter sharp as steel. When Alaric saw her approach, he raised a brow. "I did not expect you to come." "You summoned me," she replied. "I obey." He almost smiled. "Obedience is rare among Winforth blood." "And wisdom rarer still," she said, meeting his eyes. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathering, but Alaric only gestured to a smaller mare. "Ride with me, then." Let us see what courage Winforth blood holds. They rode out through the gates, the wind biting at their faces. The forest stretched before them, ancient and vast, its bare branches reaching like blackened fingers against the sky. The hounds surged ahead, baying as they caught the scent of the stag. Ilara gripped the reins tightly, her heart pounding. The horse beneath her moved with nervous energy, and though she had ridden before, never had she done so among warriors armed with lances and pride. The ground was slick, the air thick with tension. "Keep close," Alaric called over his shoulder. "The woods here do not forgive the unwary." She urged her horse forward, refusing to fall behind. Snow sprayed beneath the hooves. The hunt thundered through the trees, horns sounding, the echo chasing itself through the frost. A branch snapped overhead. A startled crow burst into the air. Suddenly one of the riders swerved too sharply and lost control. His horse reared, and the chaos rippled backward. Ilara's mare panicked, slipping on the ice. She fought for balance, clutching the reins until her palms burned. "Hold steady." Alaric's voice cut through the noise. He reached for her, guiding her horse back to the path. "Do not fight the beast, feel it." Gritting her teeth, she loosened her grip and followed his lead. Slowly, the mare steadied. For a moment, they rode side by side, breath and frost mingling between them. The stag appeared ahead, a flash of white fur among the trees. The hounds lunged forward, followed by the riders. Alaric spurred his horse into a gallop, and Ilara followed instinctively. She could hear the heartbeat in her ears, the rush of blood and snow and cold air. Then came the ambush. From the ridge above, a boar, massive and wild, charged into the path, scattering horses and men alike. The animal's tusks gleamed, and before anyone could react, it struck one of the soldiers to the ground. Alaric's horse reared. He reached for his spear, but the boar lunged again. Without thinking, Ilara seized a fallen spear from the snow. Her hands trembled, but she steadied her aim as the creature turned toward the king. With a cry that surprised even herself, she thrust the spear forward. The impact jolted her arms, the shaft splitting under the strain. The beast staggered, snarled, then collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breaths of men and horses. Alaric turned to her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You just saved my life." Ilara exhaled, shaking. "I only did what needed to be done." He studied her for a long moment, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "So it seems the Barren woman bears courage, at least." She looked away, her voice steady. "Courage is not born from favor, Your Majesty. It grows from necessity." As they returned to the castle, the others rode behind in uneasy silence. Whispers followed her name like sparks in the wind, and though her arms ached and her gown was torn, Ilara held her head high. For the first time since her arrival, she felt something shift, not in the court, not in the king, but within herself. Snow began to fall again that evening, soft and soundless, blanketing Thorn Keep in quiet grace. The hunt had ended hours ago, yet whispers of it travelled through the castle faster than the wind. The servants spoke her name in hushed tones, some with awe, others with envy. Ilara had saved the Alpha King, and no one knew what that meant for her fate. She stood by the window of her chamber, watching flakes melt against the cold glass. Her hands still ached from the spear's weight, but it was not pain she felt, it was restlessness. For the first time since her arrival, she sensed the ground beneath her beginning to shift. A knock broke her thoughts. The door opened, revealing Matron Aveline, the palace healer. Her hair was white as frost, her eyes sharp and kind. She carried a small bowl of salve. "For your hands," the woman said. "The guards say you fought like a soldier." "I only acted," Ilara replied. "If I'd stopped to think, I might have done nothing at all." Aveline smiled faintly, tending the bruises on her palms. "Instinct often shows who we truly are." Ilara studied her. "And what do you think I am?" "A woman who has forgotten to see her own strength," Aveline answered, binding the last of the cloth around her wrist. "Be wary, child. Strength draws eyes, some admiring, some dangerous." When the healer left, the fire in the hearth had burned low. Ilara moved closer to it, letting its warmth ease her thoughts. She could still hear the king's voice in her memory, the faint disbelief when he'd said she'd saved his life. There had been no mockery in his tone this time, only something quiet, uncertain. Later, as she walked through the corridor toward the great hall, she caught sight of him. Alaric stood near the balcony, hands clasped behind his back, gazing at the falling snow. The light from the torches softened his features, revealing the exhaustion hidden beneath his composure. He turned at her approach. "Lady Alara," he said, "you should be resting." "I could say the same, Your Majesty." He gave a small, reluctant smile. "Rest is a luxury for kings who have peace. I do not." "Peace," she said softly, "isn't given. It's chosen." He regarded her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You speak as if you've known war." "I've known silence," she replied, "and silence is its own kind of battle." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind outside sighed through the narrow openings in the stone, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke. Alaric's gaze dropped briefly to her bandaged hands. "You bled for me today," he said quietly, "and I have offered no thanks. I did not seek thanks." "Then what did you seek?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Perhaps to remind myself I am still capable of saving something, even if it isn't myself." The king's eyes softened in a way she had not seen before. "You are unlike anyone who has ever stood before me," he admitted. "Most fear me before they speak. Fear can silence truth," she said, "and truth is the one thing I have left." He nodded slowly, as if memorizing her words. "Then I hope you do not lose it." When he turned away, she expected dismissal, but instead he spoke again, lower, almost hesitant. "You will dine privately with me tomorrow. It is not an order, only a request." Ilara's heart quickened. "As you wish, Your Majesty." "Not as I wish," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "As you choose." She bowed her head slightly, concealing the turmoil beneath her calm. "Then I will choose to come." As she left the corridor, her pulse still thrummed in her throat. Something within her had changed, not through the king's favor, but through the strange, fragile understanding that had sparked between them. It was not trust yet, nor affection, but it was the beginning of something she could not name. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the scars of the day in white, and for the first time Ilara no longer felt like a prisoner within the walls of Thorn Keep. She felt like a storm waiting to be heard. The following morning, the air inside the great hall felt colder than the snow outside. Torches burned low against the grey stone, and the hum of murmured voices filled the chamber. Ilara stood near the foot of the dais, every gaze fixed upon her. The king sat at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. Word of the hunt had spread beyond the castle. What began as awe had turned to suspicion, sharpened by envy. Whispers claimed her courage had been luck, or deceit or witchery, anything that might explain how a barren outcast could stand at the king's side without shame. Lady Serene's voice rang clear above the murmur. "Your Majesty," she began, bowing with calculated grace, "we all witnessed the miracle of Lady Alara's valor. But there are questions the court deserves answered. Her past remains unproven, her worth untested. Should we not ensure the king's trust is wisely placed?" Alaric's gaze flickered toward her. "Speak plainly, Serene." Serene's eyes turned to Ilara, cool and gleaming. "Some say the lady carries a curse, that her father's debts were not the only reason he sold her. Others whisper that no man can father an heir with her. If this is false, then let her prove it before the court and silence these doubts." The words struck like a blade. Gasps rippled through the hall. Ilara's pulse hammered in her ears, but she held her ground. "You ask me to prove my worth as though I were cattle brought to market," she said quietly. Serene's smile was thin. "You misunderstand, my lady. This is about truth. The king's legacy demands clarity." The nobles nodded in agreement, their faces eager for spectacle. Alaric said nothing, his jaw set tight, his eyes shadowed by thought. Ilara turned toward him, refusing to lower her voice. "Your Majesty, is this what your court believes? That a woman's honor begins and ends with her womb?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to wound. Alaric rose slowly, his chair scraping against the stone. "Enough," he said, his voice like a crack of thunder. This council was called for matters of state, not gossip. But Serene persisted, her tone silk hiding steel. "Your Majesty, the people will talk unless truth is declared. If this woman cannot bear you an heir, the alliance forged by her presence means nothing. The throne deserves transparency." Something in Alaric's restraint snapped. He descended the steps and stood before Serene, his height and presence swallowing the space between them. "Do you presume," he said, his voice dangerously low, "to question the worth of someone under my protection?" Serene's composure faltered. "You will hold your tongue," he interrupted, "or lose it." The hall fell deathly still. Even the guards seemed to breathe less. Alaric turned to Elara. "You owe no proof to those who hide cruelty behind courtesy." His gaze swept the court. "Let it be known that anyone who dares speak her name in slander will answer to me." His words carried through the hall, final and fierce. The courtiers bowed their heads, fear rippling through the air like a chill. Elara stood silent, her heart pounding with conflicting tides, gratitude, disbelief, and something deeper she dared not name. When the king returned to his seat, the court resumed its business in strained murmurs. But every eye avoided hers now, not from scorn, but from caution. The woman they had mocked had become a danger simply by being seen. Later, as the assembly dissolved, Alaric caught her gaze once more. "Do not mistake their silence for respect," he said quietly. "Fear is a fickle servant." Elara met his eyes, her voice steady. "Then I will earn what fear cannot give me." He looked at her a moment longer, before nodding once, almost approvingly. As she left the hall, her footsteps echoed through the long corridor, carrying the weight of something unspoken, a promise forged not in affection, but in defiance. And though the walls of Thorn Keep were thick with judgment, for the first time, Elara felt no shame beneath their gaze. The castle slept beneath a heavy moon, its towers draped in frost. Elara sat alone by her window, the faint glow of the hearth painting her face in amber and shadow. The words from the council still lingered, sharp and cruel, echoing louder than any applause or praise ever could. She thought she had learned to bear humiliation, yet the memory of those eyes, hungry for her shame, cut deep. The king's defense had silenced them, yes, but it had also left her restless. What had driven him to stand for her? Duty, pride, or something he did not yet understand himself? A soft knock broke her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Alaric standing there, cloaked in darkness, the faintest trace of fatigue softening his face. "May I come in?" he asked. Elara hesitated only a moment before nodding. "You may, Your Majesty." He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The air seemed to change, charged, uncertain. He removed his gloves slowly, his gaze drifting to the fire. "The court spoke out of turn," he said. "I should have stopped it sooner." "You did what a king must do," she replied. "You defended your throne." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you think I defended?" She held his gaze, unflinching. "It's what I would have done." For a long moment silence filled the room, broken only by the soft crackle of burning wood. Alaric moved closer, not in dominance but in quiet honesty. "I have ruled through war, Lady Elara. I have seen kingdoms crumble for less than a whisper of weakness. When I took the throne, I swore to feel nothing, to love no one. Because love," he paused, voice roughening, "is the first thing your enemies take from you." Elara's chest tightened. She had heard rumors of his past, the queen who had died too young, the endless winters that followed, but hearing it from his lips stripped it of legend. It became something human. "I did not come here to make you remember pain," she said softly. "But perhaps you forget that even kings are allowed to grieve." His jaw clenched, as though her words struck a place he kept guarded. "Grief is a luxury I cannot afford." "Then you live as a man half alive," she replied, "and that is no kingdom worth keeping." He exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You speak like someone who knows loss. "I do," she whispered. "Not of someone dead, but of myself. Every year I lived under my father's roof, I faded a little more, until there was nothing left but a shell shaped by duty and disappointment." Their eyes met again, and in that quiet space between them, something shifted. There was no throne, no court, no crown, only two people carrying too much weight. Alaric stepped closer until the warmth of the fire brushed both their faces. "When I look at you," he said, "I see someone who refuses to break, and it terrifies me." "Why?" she asked. "Because I've spent years building walls no one could climb," he murmured. "And now I'm beginning to wonder if you've found a way through them." Ilara's breath caught. "Perhaps I only see what the walls are hiding." He reached out, fingers brushing her bandaged hand, a fleeting touch, careful, uncertain. "I don't know what you've done to me," he confessed, "but when I saw them turn on you today, something in me broke." Her voice trembled despite her resolve. "Then maybe it's time something inside you did." For a heartbeat, they stood suspended between words and silence, firelight and shadow. Then Alaric stepped back, the storm in his eyes barely contained. "This, whatever this is, cannot happen," he said. "You deserve peace, and I am not a peaceful man." "Peace is earned," she replied softly. "And you are not beyond it." He looked at her as if he wanted to believe her, but kings rarely believe in mercy, even when it stands before them. When he finally turned to leave, his voice was quiet, raw. "Good night, Ilara." "Good night, Alaric," she answered, using his name for the first time. The door closed behind him, but his presence lingered like the scent of smoke, warm, haunting, and impossible to forget. And as the night stretched on, Ilara realized she was no longer afraid of the king's silence. It was the sound of her own heart she feared now. Winter deepened across Thorn Valley, but inside the fortress something unseen had begun to thaw. Days passed in a rhythm Ilara could not name, mornings filled with quiet reading in the library, evenings spent walking through snow-laced courtyards, always with the echo of Alaric's presence nearby. He spoke little, yet his silence had changed. It was no longer the stillness of stone, but the hush of something fragile beginning to live. One afternoon she found herself in the armory, running her fingers along the worn hilts of the practice swords. The air smelled of oil and iron. Alaric appeared at the doorway, his voice softer than she remembered. "I did not take you for one drawn to weapons. I'm drawn to what protects," she replied. "Even if it's not my place to wield it." He stepped closer, his boots echoing lightly against the floor. "Everything in this castle has a place. You need only decide yours." Ilara turned toward him, her eyes steady. "And what place would you have me claim?" He hesitated. "One of choice, not chains." The words hung between them like a promise neither dared to name. She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps I will choose honesty. You frighten me, Your Majesty, not because of your power, but because I am beginning to see the man beneath it." His expression softened. "And what do you see?" "Someone burdened by ghosts, who no longer deserve to haunt him." For a moment he said nothing, only studied her with that piercing, searching gaze. Then he extended his hand. "Come. There's something I want to show you." They walked through the courtyard, snow crunching underfoot, until they reached the stables. Inside, the scent of hay and cedar filled the air. Alaric gestured toward a grey stallion. "This horse refused every rider after the war. I nearly put him down once, but I couldn't. He reminded me of myself, wild, wounded, unwilling to trust again." Ilara approached the animal slowly, extending her hand. The stallion snorted but did not retreat. She whispered softly, her tone patient and kind. After a few heartbeats, the horse lowered its head, allowing her to stroke its mane. Alaric watched, quiet awe flickering in his eyes. "You see? Even the broken learn gentleness in your presence." She looked back at him, the faintest warmth touching her cheeks. "Gentleness doesn't heal what's broken. It teaches it how to endure." They lingered there longer than they meant to, speaking little. When he finally offered her a carved pendant, a small wolf's head shaped from polished oak, she almost refused. "It's not a gift," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. It's protection, a token from the northern tribes. They carve them for those they trust to guard their own hearts. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted it. "And you believe I can guard yours?" His answer came barely above a whisper. "I believe you already have." That night Elara lay awake, tracing the lines of the pendant. The fire had burned low, shadows moving across the walls like restless thoughts. She could not deny the shift within her, the quiet pull toward a man she had once seen only as captor and king. It terrified her, not because it was forbidden, but because it felt real. Days later, Matron Aveline visited her chambers. "You seem lighter," the healer said with a knowing smile. "The heart recognizes kindness when it's given freely." Elara laughed softly. "I think the king's kindness is more armor than affection." "Perhaps," Aveline replied, "but even armor bends when it finds warmth." The healer's words lingered long after she left. Elara pressed a hand to her chest, where the pendant rested beneath her gown, and felt something she had long thought lost, a quiet hope, delicate yet alive. Outside, the wind swept through the valley, carrying the promise of spring beneath its chill. And though she could not name it, she sensed the world itself holding its breath, waiting for what might come next between them. The great hall glowed with the golden shimmer of 100 torches, their light reflecting off polished armor and jeweled cups. It was meant to be a night of celebration, the end of winter, the promise of peace, and the king's safe return from the borderlands. Yet beneath the laughter and music, Elara felt unease settle like ash upon her tongue. Something in the air was wrong. She sat near the dais beside Lady Serene, who smiled too often and too sharply. The pendant at Elara's neck felt heavy tonight, as if it knew what she did not. Alaric sat across the hall, deep in talk with his generals, unaware of the glances cast between the courtiers. Every gesture, every whisper seemed rehearsed, deliberate. "Strange," Serene murmured, leaning closer. "You've become quite the favorite, haven't you? Even the servants whisper your name with reverence." Elara met her gaze. "I do not seek favor." "Oh, but favor seeks you," Serene replied, her tone like silk drawn over a blade. "And that is dangerous in a place where envy rules the table." Before Elara could answer, a servant approached, bowing deeply. "My lady, a cup of spiced wine sent from His Majesty." The scent of cinnamon and honey rose from the goblet. She hesitated, then caught Serene's eyes, watching her too closely, too eagerly. The king lifted his own cup from across the room in silent toast. Elara smiled faintly and raised the goblet to her lips. The first sip was sweet, warm, harmless. But by the second, the warmth turned bitter. Her vision blurred at the edges. The sounds around her, music, laughter, slipped into a dull roar. She set the cup down, fingers trembling. "Are you unwell?" Serene asked, feigning concern. Elara's breath quickened. The room swayed, and her knees buckled as she grasped the edge of the table. Pain coiled through her stomach like fire. Gasps rippled through the hall as the cup fell from her hand, wine spilling like blood across the white tablecloth. Alaric was on his feet before the goblet hit the ground. "Elara!" His voice cut through the chaos, commanding silence. He crossed the room in strides, catching her before she collapsed completely. Her skin was pale, cold as marble. "Poison," murmured someone near the back. Alaric's eyes darkened to iron. "Bring the healer, now!" Matron Aveline rushed forward, pressing her fingers against Elara's pulse. "It's venom," she said, her voice taut. "Quickly, to the chambers. She won't last long if we wait." As guards carried Elara away, Alaric turned on the hall. "No one leaves," he thundered. "Seal the gates. Whoever did this will hang before dawn." The nobles froze, fear draining color from their faces. Only Serene stood still, her expression a perfect mask of sorrow. "Your Majesty, surely this was an accident." He rounded on her, fury radiating from every word. "Accidents do not stalk the weak, they aim for the heart." She bowed her head, but the flicker in her eyes did not escape him. Hours later, the healer's chambers smelled of herbs and desperation. Aveline worked in silence, her hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion. Alaric stood nearby, unmoving, watching the rise and fall of Elara's breath. Her skin was pale, her lips colourless, yet she still looked unbroken, defiant even in weakness. "Will she live?" he asked. "I've purged most of the poison," Aveline said softly. But her strength must do the rest. When the healer left, Alaric sank beside the bed. He brushed a lock of hair from Ilara's face, his hand shaking. "You should have been safe here," he murmured. "And I—" His voice faltered. "I failed you." Her eyelids fluttered and she whispered faintly, "You didn't fail me, Alaric. Not yet." He froze, her voice cutting through the fog of guilt. She was awake, weak but alive. "Rest," he said, his thumb brushing her hand. "I swear to you I will find who did this." As she drifted into sleep, he rose, his expression cold and absolute. The king who had once ruled through restraint now carried only wrath. And somewhere beyond those stone walls, in the darkness of her chambers, Lady Serene smiled to herself, believing her secret safe. But dawn was coming, and with it reckoning. Morning came without warmth. The fires had burned low, and the castle seemed to hold its breath beneath a sky the colour of iron. In the healer's chambers, Ilara slept fitfully, her skin still pale from the venom's toll. The world beyond her door had changed overnight. The court waited in terror, and the king's fury hung over Thornkeep like a storm refusing to break. Alaric stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, his reflection sharp against the frost. He had not slept. His armour remained unpolished, his crown untouched. Every whisper from the hall reached him. Theories, accusations, lies. But none mattered. What mattered was the faint rise and fall of the woman breathing behind him. When Sir Cedric entered, his voice was cautious. "Your Majesty, the council gathers. They await your word." Alaric turned, his eyes hard. "And what would they have me say? That my court poisons my guests while I drink in ignorance?" Cedric bowed his head. "They demand justice. Some say you should send Lady Ilara away to keep the peace." "Peace," Alaric muttered, the word like ash. "They poison her, and then ask for peace." "No, Cedric. There will be no peace until I know who betrayed her." The captain hesitated. "And if that betrayal came from within the throne itself?" Alaric's silence was answer enough. He left the chamber and strode through the corridors, his steps echoing off the stone. The doors to the council hall opened with a thunderous groan. Inside, nobles waited in uneasy rows. Lady Serene stood among them, her face a perfect mask of grief. "Your Majesty," she began sweetly, "we grieve the tragedy that has befallen your guest." But whispers spread among the people, dark whispers that blamed the court itself. Perhaps it would be wise to send Lady Ilara away, for her safety and yours. The room stirred with murmurs of agreement. Alaric's gaze swept over them all. "Safety?" he repeated, his voice quiet but cutting. "You speak of safety as if it can be bought by betrayal. Tell me, my lords, how many times must we sacrifice the innocent before you feel secure?" Serene's smile faltered. "You mistake caution for cruelty, my king. The people question her presence. They say her misfortune brings unrest." "And I say their unrest comes from liars and cowards," Alaric said sharply. "I will not banish the only person in this hall who still remembers what courage looks like." The words struck like a blow. No one dared move. He stepped forward, his voice rising with command. "Hear me well. Lady Ilara of Winforth will remain under my protection. Any man or woman who speaks her name in doubt speaks against the throne itself." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Serene's hands tightened at her sides, her mask of composure cracking for the first time. "You would risk your reign for her?" she whispered. "For justice," he answered, "and for truth, which neither crown nor council has managed to uphold." He turned to leave, his cloak sweeping behind him. "Prepare a proclamation," he said to Cedric. "By dusk, it will be known across every border. Ilara Winforth is under royal decree, henceforth recognized as consort to the King of Thorn." The hall erupted in chaos, but Alaric did not pause. Behind him the nobles argued in frantic tones, and Serene's voice cut through them all. A tremor of disbelief, fury barely contained. Outside the council chamber, the cold air struck him like absolution. He drew a deep breath, though his chest felt heavy. He had done what he must, yet the cost had already begun to settle. The kingdom would not forgive easily. When he returned to the healer's chambers, Ilara was awake. Her voice was weak but steady. "What have you done?" He met her gaze, the faintest glint of defiance in his own. "What I should have done long ago," he said. "I've made my choice," her breath caught. "And what choice is that?" "To stop pretending that you are anything less than what you are," he replied. "Mine." The words hung between them, fierce and unyielding, and for the first time she could not find the will to argue. Thunder rolled across the northern hills, shaking the towers of Thorn Keep, as if the heavens themselves disapproved of the king's decree. The storm had not ceased for 2 days, and neither had the murmurs in the court. Rumor travelled faster than rain. Ilara Winforth, once sold for her barrenness, was now declared consort to the Alpha King. Ilara stood by the hearth, her heart a battlefield of gratitude and dread. She had not asked for the crown's favour, yet it had found her, and with it came the full weight of envy and expectation. Even the servants now bowed lower, their fear disguised as respect. When the doors opened behind her, she turned, expecting the king. Instead, she froze. "Father." Lord Barren Winforth filled the doorway, his cloak soaked, his expression twisted between arrogance and disbelief. "So it's true," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "My daughter sits in the king's court, wearing a title she did not earn." Ilara's breath hitched. "You have no right to be here." He smirked, stepping closer. "I was invited." "The king believes matters of debt should be settled face to face." "Debt?" she repeated. "You sold me like livestock. What debt remains?" "The kind that grows with interest," he replied coldly. "Your life, my dear, was worth more than the gold I received, and now that you have wormed your way into the king's favor, it's time you repay me." Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You will not threaten me again, not here." The door opened once more and Alaric entered, his presence filling the chamber like the arrival of a storm. His expression hardened at the sight before him. "You overstep, Lord Winforth." Barren bowed slightly, mock respect in the gesture. "Your Majesty, I come only to claim what was promised. My daughter's dowry remains unpaid." "The debt must be honored." Alaric's voice was quiet, but its calm was more dangerous than anger. "You speak of debt, while standing before the man you sold your blood to? You should be on your knees." Barren's jaw tightened. "She was barren, worthless. I made a practical choice." The words struck Ilara like a blade, though they no longer had power to wound. She stepped forward before Alaric could answer. "You speak of worth as though it were something you understand," she said, "but all your choices were made from fear. You feared poverty more than you loved your own blood." Her father's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tongue." "Or what?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Will you sell me again? You no longer hold that power, father." "You never truly did." Alaric watched her, pride flickering beneath his stoic gaze. "Lord Winforth," he said, stepping closer, until his shadow fell across the trembling nobleman, "you will receive nothing from this court but exile. Your title, your lands, your privileges, they belong now to the crown." Barren's face blanched. "You cannot—" "I am the law here," Alaric interrupted, his tone final. "And your law ends where her suffering began." Guards entered at his signal. Barren's protests filled the room as they seized him, dragging him toward the door. "You'll regret this," he shouted. "She'll ruin you as she ruined me." Ilara didn't flinch. She met his gaze for the last time and said, "No, father. You ruined yourself." When the doors closed behind him, silence settled. Rain hammered against the windows, steady and relentless. Alaric turned to her, his voice low. "He cannot touch you again." Ilara exhaled, the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. "Then it's done." "It's only beginning," he said softly. "You've freed yourself from your past. Now you must decide what to do with your future." She looked into his eyes, searching for the man behind the crown, the one who had chosen to believe in her. "Then perhaps," she said, It's time I stop fearing what comes next. Outside, the storm began to fade, and in the stillness that followed, Elara realized she was no longer the daughter who had been sold, but the woman who had survived. The first warmth of spring touched Thorn Valley with hesitant fingers. Snow melted into rivers that sang through the hills, and the scent of pine replaced the bitter tang of winter. Within the castle, life stirred again, yet Elara felt a quiet stillness she could not name. Weeks had passed since her father's banishment, and though freedom had come, peace had not. She often walked the ramparts at dawn, the pendant Alaric had given her resting against her heart. Each morning she told herself the ache inside was fading. Each morning she found it had not. That day, Matron Aveline sought her out in the gardens. The old healer's face glowed with a secret she struggled to contain. "You look pale, child," she said. "Tell me, have you been unwell?" "I've been restless," Elara admitted. "The air feels heavier somehow." Aveline smiled knowingly. "Restless, tired, faint in the mornings." Elara frowned. "You speak as though you know something I do not." "I suspect I do," the healer said softly. "Come to the infirmary before dusk." "There is something I must confirm." Confusion lingered long after Aveline left, but by the time the sun dipped below the hills, curiosity outweighed fear. Elara found the healer waiting beside the long oak table, vials and herbs neatly arranged. Aveline motioned her to sit, her voice gentle. "Do not be afraid, my dear, this will take but a moment." Minutes passed in quiet tension. Then the old woman turned, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Elara," she whispered, "you are with child." The words struck like thunder and sunlight all at once. "That cannot be," Elara breathed. "I was told—" "Lies," Aveline interrupted softly. "You were never barren, only broken by those who needed to believe you were. Life finds its way even through the wounds of cruelty." Ilara's hand moved to her stomach, trembling. "A child," she murmured. "His child." That night she sought Alaric. He was in the war room, bent over a map, candlelight flickering across his face. When he saw her, his expression softened. "You shouldn't be walking alone at this hour." "I had to tell you," she said, voice barely steady. Something in her tone made him straighten. "What is it?" She took a breath that felt like a leap into the unknown. "I carry your child." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The crackle of the fire, the rustle of parchment, all swallowed by silence. Alaric's eyes widened, disbelief flickering into something raw and unguarded. "Say it again," he whispered. "I am with child," she repeated, her voice trembling. He crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped before her, as though afraid to touch what he could not yet believe. "Elara," he said quietly, you were told it was impossible." "So was hope," she replied. "Yet here we are." For the first time since she had known him, the king's composure broke. He reached out, his hand finding hers, and for a moment the weight of crowns, wars and wounds fell away. "You've given me more than an heir," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me back faith." Tears burned her eyes, though she smiled through them. "Then promise me something, Alaric." "Promise that this child will never know the loneliness we have known." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I swear it on everything I am." The door creaked open, and Cedric appeared, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the court awaits your command. Word of her condition will spread by morning." Alaric glanced at Elara, his decision already made. "Let it," he said. "Let them see that truth blooms where lies once ruled." As Cedric departed, Alaric turned back to her, his hand resting over hers upon the curve of her stomach. "You've changed my kingdom, Elara Winforth," he said softly. "But more than that, you've changed me." Outside, the first dawn of spring broke across the valley, gilding the stones of Thorn Keep with light. And in that moment, surrounded by promise and the scent of new beginnings, Elara finally believed what she once thought impossible. The bells of Thorn Keep rang through the morning air, echoing across the valley like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. The court gathered in the great hall where banners of gold and black swayed above the crowd. The scent of cedar and rosewater hung heavy, mingling with the rustle of silks and armor. Every noble, every knight, every servant waited in breathless anticipation. At the far end stood Alaric, dressed not in the war-born steel of his rule, but in the formal robes of coronation, dark velvet trimmed in silver, the crown of the northern realms gleaming in his hands. Yet it was not for himself that the ceremony was held. It was for her. Ilara entered between the towering doors, her gown a soft ivory touched with the embroidery of wolves and wildflowers. The hall fell silent as she passed, and in that silence she felt the weight of every gaze, the disbelief, the wonder, the fear. A woman once sold for being barren now carried the kingdom's future beneath her heart. When she reached the dais, Alaric's expression softened. "Ilara Winforth," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "When I first saw you, I thought you were sent to remind me what mercy costs. Now I know you were sent to show me what love demands." Her breath trembled. "And what does it demand of you, my king?" He smiled faintly. "Everything." The priest stepped forward, speaking the words of tradition that had bound kings and queens for generations. But to Ilara, they sounded distant, like the echoes of another life. All she saw was Alaric, the man who had defended her before a hostile court, who had learned to speak gently where once he ruled with iron. When the crown was lowered onto her head, the hall erupted into applause that shook the very walls. Yet Ilara barely heard it. Her hands found Alaric's, their fingers entwining as though they had always known where they belonged. "Rise, Queen of Thorn," the priest declared. Alaric's gaze never left her. "You have given this kingdom its heart again," he whispered. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then may it never stop beating." After the ceremony, the celebration spilled into the courtyards. Musicians played, children ran between the columns, and the scent of roasted bread and mead filled the air. The people chanted her name, not as an outsider, but as their queen. Yet amid the joy, Ilara found herself standing quietly by the balcony, watching the valley below. She could still see the ruins of her past there, the girl who once rode away from her father's keep, broken and alone. She barely recognized her now. A voice behind her broke the silence. "You look like a woman who still carries yesterday's ghosts," Alaric said gently. "Perhaps I do," she replied, turning to him. "But today they no longer frighten me." He stepped closer, his hands resting over hers. "You've given me everything I thought I'd lost. Hope, peace, and now a future. And you've given me what I never believed I'd find," she said softly. "A life that feels like my own." They stood in quiet understanding, the noise of the celebration fading behind them. Then Alaric lifted her hand and placed it over his heart. "Let the world see us as they will," he said. "But know this, Ilara. There is no throne, no crown, no power that I desire more than the life we build together." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Then let that be our reign, one built not on fear but on faith." He smiled, leaning closer, until his forehead rested against hers. "A reign of love," he murmured. Outside, the bells rang once more, their sound rolling through the valley like thunder blessed by sunlight. And as the people cheered for their new queen, Ilara closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. For the first time, she was not defined by what she had lost, but by what she had become. A woman reborn not through power or promise, but through love that no crown could contain. Spring matured into summer, and with it came peace unlike any the kingdom had known in decades. The banners of war were folded away, the forges quiet, and laughter returned to the courtyards. For the first time, Thornkeep felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Ilara walked through the garden at dawn, the scent of blooming roses heavy in the air. The morning sun spilled across her gown, its warmth a gentle reminder that life, fragile and miraculous, had endured. In her arms rested her son, a small bundle of quiet wonder, his eyes the same deep grey as his father's. She traced a fingertip along the child's cheek and whispered, "You are proof that even the barren can bloom." Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Alaric standing at the archway, his crown absent, his expression softened by fatherhood. You've been awake since before sunrise, he said, his voice carrying both pride and concern. I like watching the world wake, she replied. It reminds me that we survived it. He smiled faintly, crossing the garden to join her. When his hand brushed the baby's head, the small boy stirred, but did not cry. He has your calm, Alaric murmured. And your stubbornness, she teased. He refused to sleep until you returned from council last night. Alaric chuckled, though a trace of guilt lingered. The council fears I've grown soft. They say love has made me gentle. Elara tilted her head. And do you believe them? No, he said. Love hasn't made me gentle. It has made me certain. She smiled, the words settling deep in her heart. Then be certain of this, she said. Whatever comes, we face it together. They stood in silence, the hum of bees and rustle of leaves filling the quiet between them. Beyond the castle walls, the kingdom thrived, fields green again, trade restored, children playing where soldiers once marched. Yet Alaric's eyes wandered toward the horizon. Do you think they'll remember, he asked, the peace we built, the promise we made? Elara looked at him, understanding the unspoken weight behind the question. They will, she said softly. Because peace is not remembered through history books. It's remembered through the lives that flourish beneath it. Alaric exhaled slowly, his gaze returning to her. You always know how to quiet the storm in me. That's because I once lived inside it, she replied, her tone gentle. And I learned that storms don't end, they change their nature. He took her free hand and kissed it, reverence in the gesture. You changed mine entirely. She laughed softly, blinking back the tears that came too easily these days. You speak like a poet, Alaric Thorne. Only because you taught me to listen, he said. As they walked back toward the keep, Elara felt the rhythm of life pulse around her. The sounds of workers in the fields, the laughter of servants preparing for the midsummer feast, the song of distant bells carried on the wind. Everything that had once felt like a dream now lived and breathed beside her. At the great doors, she paused and turned back, the child stirring in her arms. He'll grow to rule one day, she said. Do you think he'll understand what it cost us to make this world? Alaric looked down at his son and then at her. If he doesn't, he'll have a mother who will remind him. She smiled, her gaze drifting upward to the clear blue sky. Then our legacy will not be of crowns or battles. It will be of choice, the choice to love when hate was easier. He nodded, his arms sliding around her shoulders. Then that will be the greatest victory of all. They walked inside together, the doors closing softly behind them. And for those who would tell their story in years to come, they would speak not of the Alpha King's fury or the barren woman's shame, but of how love turned ruin into rebirth and silence into song. If you believed in Elara's strength, subscribe now and follow her legacy as it continues beyond the walls of Thorn Keep. Click on the next story to see what destiny awaits the children of the Alpha King, where every choice made in love will echo through generations.